So let's start with the food forest, syntropic agroforestry, island planting from David the Good. Succession planting, support species, pioneer species in chopping and dropping. So it's this incredible thing called the wood wide web. And the only way to attract these things is with flowers. And I'll create a huge list of flowers right here, which I plan on growing. Some of the mushrooms I want to grow are lion's mane, oyster mushrooms, turkey tail, reishi, and I've already grown lion's mane and oyster mushrooms before. I really want to grow avocados and citrus, banana trees and figs and cucumbers and mango trees and maybe olive trees. And in order to do this, I plan on building a Wallapini greenhouse, which is basically a pit greenhouse. And this design is amazing. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the permaculture community. Today I'm going to be talking about starting a permaculture farm and what is our plan. This will be broken up into 5 different sections, and I'm going to be releasing these videos separately as well. All right, number 3 is growth projects. Once again, extremely broad, but it's mostly going to be surrounding things that we plan on growing. So let's start with the food forest. You could also think of it kind of like an orchard. You could also think of it like syntropic agroforestry, and you could also think of it like island planting from David the Good. And the reason I say you can think of it like all of these things is because I want to try all of these things. I don't exactly know which one I want to try. I love all of these different methods, and I might incorporate all of them. I don't really know yet because I haven't gotten to the land. I haven't tried it yet. But I do like how each of these can kind of inform one another. Right, I really like the idea of succession planting, support species, pioneer species, which I'll get into in a moment, in chopping and dropping. So having plants that are going to be extremely helpful in supporting the other species grow. And you can check out this video from Byron Grows, which is an incredible video on a complete guide to food forest design and installation, where he talks about kind of the different canopy layers and how to design and install everything, which is insanely comprehensive, and I really suggest you check it out. I also really want to try grocery row gardening, which I mentioned is from David the Good. David the Good is the man. If you don't subscribe or watch his videos, you definitely should. He's got incredible content on literally everything gardening related. And grocery row gardens, if you don't know, are basically a system where you kind of incorporate the principles of a food forest and permaculture with your annuals, with your everyday vegetables that you want to be eating. So you're going to have trees in there, you're going to have perennials, you're going to have herbs, you're going to have annuals, everything, your ground cover, your root vegetables, you're going to have everything in there, all in one system. And it looks crazy if you watch his videos. It looks insane because it's so jam-packed with so many different things. It looks like a freaking forest, because it basically is. You want to create that microclimate so that it's more self-sufficient, so you don't have to water as much. I've seen his videos. He doesn't work that much once he gets it up and going. So that's something that sounds extremely interesting to me. And in that system, because you have so many different things that need sun, you will need to keep pruning your trees to keep them really small. But I've heard that trees, even when they're pretty small, they can still be pretty prolific with the amount of food that they produce. Just depends on the tree and how much you prune, I guess. But for that system, I don't plan on having these ginormous trees which are, blocking the sun for all of the different plants. We also maybe, when we first start our growth projects, we might be using something like workaway or woofing. I'm not sure yet. It's definitely something that we're going to be thinking about doing, because it would be incredibly helpful to have more hands on deck helping us build these things. The next step is rewilding the land. Honestly, I have no idea if this is going to be applicable because we don't have the land yet. But here are some things that I've acquired that could be helpful to you, that have been helpful to me to plan for rewilding the land. So one thing is Back to Eden. Back to Eden is basically where you put cardboard down, you put wood chips over the top of it, and that kind of breaks down over time, adds mycelium to the soil. It adds a lot of carbon to the soil that slowly degrades over time, but it adds a good thick layer of rich compost within the first year to 2 years. And you can check out Ann of All Trades' video in the description. Another way to rewild the land is with cover crops. one method I really like, which is the laziest method of all time, is just dispersing a lot of different variety of cover crops, which are going to be nitrogen fixers. And I'll put some of them on the screen here. And these are just going to be getting roots in the ground, adding biology back to the soil, loosening up the structure of the soil, especially if you have clay soil. The most important thing in permaculture is having life in the soil. Having living roots in the soil is the most important thing for that soil retaining moisture, that soil retaining life, for developing mycorrhizal fungi, which connect all the different plants together and disperse nutrients across, which I'll get to in a second. Another thing with rewilding is adding flowers, which I'll get to in a little bit. And at the beginning of rewilding the land or of developing a food forest is introducing pioneer species if there aren't already some on our property. And to name some of them that I'm thinking about implementing on the farm, we've got willow trees, poplar trees, alder trees, black locust, pine trees, maple trees. All of these are pioneer species because they kind of pop up first, because they're the first trees to pop up in disturbed areas, disturbed environments that kind of create the root structure to help everything else thrive, because they create that mycorrhizal fungi network. They're extremely resilient plants, and they add a lot of biomass to the soil around them to act as a mulch for other plants to thrive and to keep that soil moist around them. Another type of tree that we would be introducing are chop and drop trees. These are trees that are going to grow super, super fast, produce a lot of leaves that are rich in nitrogen that we can chop and drop and add as a mulch to the ground to support other species of trees, other species of plants. I also plan on incorporating support species, which are going to be good for shade, for food for different wildlife, and also for its root structure, supporting the species of different trees that I want to grow to get food from. But maybe the most important reason for me is I want to have our permaculture farm be kind of a sanctuary for wildlife. My wife and I are vegan, if you don't already know. So we have a soft spot for wildlife. We want to create a system that is in harmony with all of the different animals. So going back to that mycorrhizal fungi that these trees develop a symbiotic relationship with, if you don't know, mycorrhizal fungi is symbiotic with trees because it wants the sugars to grow that the trees produce from photosynthesis. And the trees want the nutrients and the water that the mycelium from the mycorrhizal fungi can bring and transfer to the tree. And when you have these support species, which have huge root structures under the ground, connecting with mycorrhizal fungi, that fungi is going to connect with different trees that are growing nearby. And the amazing thing about mycorrhizal fungi is because it is kind of a reciprocating relationship, it wants every plant to thrive. So if it sees an imbalance, a tree that is deficient in something and it's not producing the sugars that the fungi wants, it will send enzymes back and forth between these two organisms. And the fungi will know to transport those nutrients and those micronutrients from places in excess towards the places of deficiency. So it's this incredible thing called the wood wide web, which creates a resilient system, and that is the goal of permaculture. But it all really starts with pioneer species and support species. And this next section is on the production species. This is going to be way too long, and I can't even provide all the things that I want to be growing for production, such as fruit trees, nut trees, leafy green trees, medicinal trees, syrup producing trees, livestock feed trees. This is just an incredibly small list of the ones that I really want to grow, but who knows what I'm going to be growing by the time we actually get there. Another thing that is so crucial. So I mentioned I want our permaculture farm to be extremely habitable for all the different wildlife. So I really want to cultivate that. So I already mentioned this in a previous video about water for our ponds, chinampas, and swales, and how that's going to help bring wildlife to our farm. But here's some other things that we could do. We could build bird houses. Birds are incredible because while they may eat some of your crop, of course they're going to do that, they're going to make up for it in leaps and bounds with what they bring. So first off, their pest control. There's a lot of different species of birds that will eat some of your pests. But maybe the most important thing to me is that they replant your crops for you, right? So they eat the crops, they eat your seeds, whatever they're eating, they're going to be pooping that out and planting it and fertilizing your land with their poop. But you're going to be getting all of these different plants popping up that you didn't plant that were spread by the birds. So they are essential, especially for your native plants, the plants that really love that climate. Your birds are going to be preferring those because when it comes to wildlife, they really prefer the plants that are native, the ones that they're used to. So that's something to be aware of. We also want to create bat houses. I don't know if you know this, I just learned this recently, but bats can eat up to 8,000 mosquitoes per day. I had no idea. And now I love bats. Bats are also incredible for crop protection. They feed on beetles, moths, and other pests that could damage your crops. And if you do have livestock, which we may, I'm not sure, maybe like way down the line, it's incredibly important to limit mosquitoes in the area because that can limit the diseases that your animals are getting. Another really cool thing about bats that I had no idea about is that they are nocturnal pollinators. So a lot of plants that bloom at night, like agave or certain fruit trees, bats are essential for pollinating those fruit trees. So some examples are bananas, mangoes, guavas, and cacao. I don't think we're going to be growing cacao. It's an incredibly difficult plant to grow, but I do want to have bats on our property. And once again, just like birds, they disperse your seeds across the landscape. They are an incredibly important part of creating a thriving ecosystem. We also want owl houses. We're going to be building all of these different houses. I don't think we're going to be buying them. But owls are amazing for kind of the rodent control. So like moles, voles, gophers, mice, rats. Obviously, it's sad that animals are going to be getting eaten on our property, but it is kind of important to have pests and predators. You need them both, and I want to be inviting the predators especially because I already know we're going to be having pests. We do also plan on having at least a couple different beehives. Probably something similar to the flow hive. I don't know if it would be exactly that one because that one's pretty dang expensive. We do really want bees on our property and lots of them because they are so important for pollination. That is the primary reason why I would want bees on our property. But also, obviously, they produce a lot of honey, so we can harvest some of that with the flow hive and help bees thrive because they are becoming somewhat endangered in the United States because of habitat loss, pesticide use, diseases, and climate change. I would like to provide a space for bees to thrive. Another thing we want to create is a flower meadow. There's no question that we're going to be having a lot of different flowers interspersed throughout the landscape, flowers, herbs, perennials that flower, all of these different plants that are going to be incredibly important for attracting beneficial insects. Insects are so important. And without a wide variety of insects and beneficial predatory insects, pests can kind of get out of control, which is another tip that I wanted to mention, which is don't kill the pests. Pests are the only thing that is attracting the predators, right? So if you kill all of the pests yourselves, you spray them all with whatever you're going to spray, there's no food anymore for the predators, so they're going to be going somewhere else. So the only way to have a balanced ecosystem is to let the pests come and then let the predators come and do its job, and then they kind of have a checks and balances system. So I'd rather let my farm operate on a checks and balances system than me have to do an exorbitant amount of work trying to control how many mites are eating my plants. That's impossible. Aphids go crazy. We need ladybugs, all right? We can't be managing pests on our own. We need the ladybugs. We need the praying mantis, the hoverflies, all of these beneficial insects, the beetles that are going to be helping us manage the pests. And the only way to attract these things is with flowers. And I'll create a huge list of flowers right here, which I plan on growing. So not only are these flowers going to be medicinal and used for culinary purposes for us, but they're also going to keep all of our plants extremely healthy. It's going to create a thriving ecosystem with checks and balances, like I mentioned. But it's important to have these in every area of the garden. You don't want just one flower meadow, even though we do want that. we need to have these plants around every single area that we're going to be growing plants in. Another thing we plan on growing are mushrooms. I've already grown mushrooms myself. I've grown mushrooms in farmers markets, and I have a soft spot for mushrooms. I really love them, and I want to grow a lot of different varieties. Some of the mushrooms I want to grow are lion's mane, oyster mushrooms, turkey tail, reishi, and I've already grown lion's mane and oyster mushrooms before, but I really want to grow turkey tail and reishi. I know turkey tail is really common in the wild, so I might not need to grow it, but I would still like to. And I've mainly grown mushrooms in buckets and bags, but I really want to grow mushrooms on logs. That is my big idea for the future. The nice thing is that once you do all that upfront work for growing mushrooms on logs, that it can last for about 5 years, potentially longer if you soak it in water after a couple of years and rehydrate it, because mushrooms are 90% water. And if you're interested in growing mushrooms, period, but especially in buckets, I highly suggest Fresh Cap Mushrooms. He's got so many helpful videos when it comes to growing mushrooms, or just knowing about how mushrooms are medicinal. He has his own medicinal mushroom extract that he sells on Amazon that I've tried a couple times, and it's incredible. But here's that video explaining the process that I plan on doing for how to grow mushrooms on logs. So it's really important that the hardwood trees that you cut down, and they usually have to be hardwood for these types of mushrooms, they need to be freshly cut. So within a month, but ideally within a few days of cutting the trees down. Or if a fallen tree happens, that's a great opportunity to use that tree for growing mushrooms. So the main supplies you're going to need are a drill to drill the holes inside the mushroom logs. You're going to need mushroom plug spawn, which are basically like these little dowels that are inoculated with mycelium. And you put those into the log and you hammer it into the log. And then you need some type of sealant. So in this video, he's using beeswax. People also use paraffin wax, but that's just to make sure that the mycelium dowels don't get dehydrated, right? That they stay hydrated inside the log and that no other competing species of fungus or mold gets in there and competes with the fungus that you're trying to grow. And for reishi in particular, they need a little barrier of soil or leaf litter, just a small layer between the log and the air to produce an incredibly humid environment that they will grow through that small barrier and fruit above the soil. And the last couple things we plan on growing are plants in greenhouses, right? So my vision is to be growing plants that love the heat when we're probably going to be in zone somewhere between 6 and 8. And I really want to grow avocados and citrus and banana trees and figs and cucumbers and mango trees and maybe olive trees. And in order to do this, I plan on building a Wallapini greenhouse, which is basically a pit greenhouse. And this design is amazing because the earth under the frost line has a stable temperature of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. And as we know, heat rises. So if you dig a deep enough pit greenhouse, you are going to have a system which has constantly rising temperature from the ground up to the top of the greenhouse. And this makes it so that even in very, very cold temperatures, in freezing temperatures, you can have these plants that I'm talking about grow in these pit greenhouses. And man, oh man, there's nothing I want more than to grow avocados. The more you watch me, the more you're going to realize I need avocados in my life. I'm not going to live without them. I will grow them. And the last thing that's kind of about growing is our kitchen greenhouse. We're going to be mostly having herbs and different plants that don't require much space in the kitchen greenhouse. At least this is a vision. We don't know if this is for sure going to be what we're doing in the future, but we do plan on having a kitchen greenhouse, which is going to be this very nice large space for our kitchen, which sounds so much nicer than having a tiny crammed kitchen inside of our shed, because we're doing a shed to house conversion. If you do want to see our video on our plans for our shed to house conversion, you can find that here. All right, I know that was a lot, but that is all of our different growth project plans for our permaculture farm. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.